right. Welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining us this evening for a very exciting virtual event celebrating the brilliant group of authors spotlighted in our First Fiction 2025. As always, my name is India Lena González, and I'm the features editor of Poets and Writers magazine. I hope everyone is staying cool this summer. Now, a few housekeeping notes before we move forward with tonight's event. We invite and highly encourage you all to utilize the chat and share any questions you may have for our first fiction authors regarding their books, their creative processes, or any of the above as it pertains to writing and publishing. Of course, we ask that you keep the chat a respectful space for literary conversation. We also kindly ask that you make sure you're muted. Perfect timing with the dog. Please make sure that you are muted throughout so we can fully enjoy the main event without any background noise, as much as I enjoyed that howl. Additionally, please consider becoming a member of Poets and Writers if you aren't already, so we can continue offering programs such as this one and producing even more exciting editorial features. We will provide a link in the chat to our membership page for those of you who are interested in epic howl indeed to start tonight's event. To offer a bit of background on our annual First Fiction feature, which is now in its 25th year running, for this roundup of the summer's best debut fiction, we ask established authors to interview our 5 selected writers. This year's feature included intimate and honest conversations covering craft, the writing process, and publishing, as well as the very real life experiences and contemplations that have led each author to imagining wholly original creative worlds. Worlds full of humanity, humor, pain, and hope. That old friend. The 5 writers who took the time to thoughtfully and generously introduce our first fiction authors this year were Lauren Grodstein, David Heskel Wandley Wyden, Megan Kamale Kakimoto, Honoré Fanon Jeffers, and Jonathan Escoffery. Now, tonight's event will include readings from our debut fiction writers, which will be followed by a conversation about their book journeys thus far. This evening, we have the pleasure of hearing from and sharing space with Sarah Yahm, author of Unfinished Acts of Wild Creation, published by Dzanc Books in May, Jon Hickey, author of Big Chief, published by Simon & Schuster in April, Carrie R. Moore, author of Make Your Way Home, published by Tin House Books this month, Aaron John Curtis, author of Old School Indian, published by Hillman Grad Books in May, and Jemimah Wei, author of The Original Daughter, published by Doubleday in May. Thank you all for being with us tonight, and our hearty congratulations on the publication of your books. For our audience, we also have a bookshop page, including the titles of all of tonight's debut authors, should you feel moved to purchase their books and support independent booksellers in the process, which we're all about. That will be shared in the chat as well. And as a bonus to this feature, while the July-August 2025 print magazine includes these interviews with our luminous debut writers, exclusive excerpts and readings from their books can also be found on our website. So in the chat, we're going to drop a link to the online feature so you can enjoy these extra goodies as well. Lots of lovely links going around. All right, let's delve right in. Our first reader will be Sarah Yahm. Sarah has worked as an educator, oral historian, documentarian, and writer. She has a master's degree in social documentation from UC Santa Cruz and in public humanities from Brown University. She's taught at colleges and universities and in public parks and elementary schools. She has published in Slate, Bellevue Literary Review, and placed pieces on NPR and affiliates, among others. In her work as a writer and an academic, she's focused on the lived experience and social meaning of illness and disability. She lives in the woods in central Vermont with her family. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks so much. Okay, I'm going to read a 5-minute excerpt from a chapter called Postpartum Sonata from my novel Unfinished Acts of Wild Creation. All you need to know is that the main character of this chapter is named Louise. She's just had a daughter named Lydia, and her husband is named Leon. Postpartum Sonata, 1979. It wasn't supposed to be this way. She wasn't supposed to be alone in the country all day with a screaming baby. Every morning was a Sisyphean repetition of the same thankless tasks as the day before. The same diapers needed to be changed, the same dishes needed to be washed, the same thoughts paraded through her head, and that endless fucking rain. When they'd made plans to move upstate, Janine and Dan Sheftel were going to buy that horse farm next door, and Janine and Louise were going to convert the barn into their music studio. Louise had imagined the two of them making huge vats of applesauce from the trees in the yard and playing music on the top floor of the barn, light filtering through motes of dust onto their stringed instruments while their progeny played barefoot in the grass. Bullshit hippie fantasies, Louise thought, staring at her barren yard. Louise and Leon had closed on the house during the last gasp of winter on an aggressively sunny day, which made everything seem hopeful and clean, unlike the garbage saturated Manhattan slush they'd left behind. That night, they'd invited the Sheftels over to the apartment to celebrate. While Louise was trying to simultaneously scoop Thai food into her mouth and nurse, Janine had blurted out, "We decided we don't want to leave the city." Louise and Leon stared at them, dumbfounded. "But we had a plan," Louise protested. Janine avoided her eyes. "I just don't want to live that far from Pad Thai," she said, gesticulating with her chopsticks, the takeout container perched on her third trimester belly. Later that night, in bed, Louise and Leon stared at the ceiling. "Did we make a mistake?" Louise asked. "No," Leon said. "Remember the fireplace and the wood floors and the big yard? We can grow vegetables. You can start that music school without her. We don't need them," he promised. Louise nodded and warmed her cold toes in the crevice behind Leon's knees, imagining warming them in front of that fireplace. But nothing had worked out as planned. As soon as they moved, it began to rain. It rained for a biblical number of days straight, and WNYC and WBAI both had endless fund drives. Sometimes Louise was so lonely she made a donation just to hear a human voice, resulting in an embarrassing collection of public radio tote bags that she hid in the upstairs closet. She looked out the rain-splattered window and tried to remember the date, but she had no idea. The days all blurred together. She just knew it was a Tuesday, suspended somewhere in an interminable rainy spring. The only thing that made today different than the day before and the day before that was that she hadn't had her 10 glorious solitary minutes in the shower before Leon left for work. He'd taken a long, self-indulgent shit with the New York Times and then was running late, so the baby had been attached to her sticky body nonstop since 6 a.m. Janine was supposed to be here, she thought. Janine was supposed to say, "Give me the baby for a few minutes." And then Louise would take a fucking shower and a nap and remember that she loved her child. Because right now she wasn't sure she did. In fact, right now she was pretty sure she didn't. At first, being pregnant felt like an existential loophole, like she was cheating the universe, like she'd stumbled onto a get out of jail free card from the basic loneliness of being human. Sometimes, when she was standing in line at the grocery store or lying in bed, unable to sleep, she'd touch her still flat belly and feel an unfamiliar sense of peace overtake her body, a comforting two-ness. But then, in those last swollen months of pregnancy, she felt possessed by an alien invader, a parasite intent on ruining the hard-won life she'd built. In December, Louisa's wrists swelled with edema and she couldn't play the cello at all. She'd spent her nights moving between the kitchen and the bedroom, alternating between soaking her swollen wrists in cold water and trying to sleep, while the baby kicked against the walls of her uterus. Instead of feeling like she had a secret companion, she felt the most alone she ever had. "What if I can't ever play the cello again?" she'd whispered out loud in the tiny cockroach-infested kitchen of their one-bedroom apartment. Even though she'd spent her entire adolescence fantasizing about setting her cello on fire, now that this creature was taking it away from her, she was filled with an all-encompassing fury. "What if I resent her forever for it?" she asked the empty kitchen, because she couldn't bring herself to ask Leon, who would pretend not to be disappointed in her. And then there was the failed home birth, and then the brutal Lysol-soaked days in the hospital, and after the endless diapers and the weeks without sleep. And just when she was starting to get the hang of it, just when she had the energy to pull her cello out of the closet, Lydia started teething and screaming, and Louise couldn't stop thinking about the stairs. The first week after they'd moved into the house, Louise was carrying a crying Lydia in one arm and a basket of laundry in the other when her foot slipped on the worn wood of the basement stairs. She'd landed hard on her ass, the laundry basket clattering all the way down the steps onto the cement floor. She'd sat there for what felt like hours, holding Lydia to her chest, trying not to picture Lydia tumbling down the stairs like the laundry basket and cracking her head on the hard cement. She'd gotten up incredibly carefully, walking upstairs to the bedroom, and nursed Lydia for hours, singing to her quietly while it rained outside. Fuck the cello, Louise had thought, lowering her head to breathe in the sour milk smell emanating from the chubby folds under Lydia's chin. I was never all that great anyway. Instead of feeling like she was in a prison, she felt like the two of them were tucked safely inside the belly of a ship, gently rocking. But since then, when Lydia refused to nap, or when she scratched open Louise's breast with her sharp nails, or when her nipple split open from cluster feeding, she pictured Lydia tumbling down the stairs with a fierce pleasure that terrified her. If Lydia cracked her head open on the basement floor, Louise reasoned in her sleep deprived state, they would have to move back to the city. How could they stand to live in the house where their child had died? If Lydia fell, tumbled, slipped, flew, Louise would be within walking distance of pad thai again. She would have her days back, her nights back, her body back, her career back. It would be as if they'd never decided to have a baby at all.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Lovely. All right. Whew. Our next author is Jon Hickey. A writer from Minnesota, he earned an MFA from Cornell University and was a Stegner Fellow in Fiction at Stanford University. His short stories have appeared in numerous journals, such as Virginia Quarterly Review, Gulf Coast, and the Massachusetts Review, among others. He is a member of the Lac de Flambeau Band of Chippewa Indians, Anishinaabe. He lives in San Francisco with his wife and two sons. Welcome, Jon.
Thanks, India. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be with all the other authors. Thought I'd read from the first pages of Big Chief right there. Yeah, this is the very beginning. The season's first shiver comes on Thanksgiving morning, 5 days before the election. It's a passing shudder when I leave for work and see the dead leaves and pine needles standing defiantly through the soft snow that blankets the Passage Rouge Indian Reservation. The shudder becomes a shake as I scrape the frost glaze off my windshield and fumble with my car keys. I try to keep it together when I drive through what's left of the old village, where my grandparents and ancestors once survived the harsh winters. But when I pass the blind corner outside the Chippewa Super, where 10 years ago my mother eased her car onto Highway 92 and into the path of four high school kids with a handle of E&J brandy and a stolen 1994 Pontiac Grand Prix, the shiver is chattering my teeth together. But then it's gone, and I'm standing in the parking lot looking up at the log cabin facade of the Golden Eagle Casino and Resort, briefcase in hand, confused and thinking of a question my mother might have asked me had she lived to see this. Mitch Caddo, what exactly are you doing here? I'm 30 years old, the youngest ever tribal operations director of the Passage Rouge Nation of Lake Superior Anishinaabe, a tribe of about 5,000 enrolled members. Our reservation is in the north woods of Wisconsin, nestled within a confluence of picturesque lakes and lush forest that has drawn the Shamokamanag, the whites, and their money for more than 3 centuries. We're not huge like the Navajo Nation, but we're bigger than our neighbors in Bad River and Menominee, and we have federal recognition and a sovereign constitutional government. Its bureaucracy, legal, business development, education, safety, enrollment, health and family services et al. Answers to me. And I'm also the chief operations officer of the Passage Rouge Golden Eagle Enterprises, the limited liability corporation that manages the day-to-day operations at the Golden Eagle Casino and Resort, the economic center of the reservation that rakes in $25 million a year, home of the loosest slots in the state. I'm the suit and tie, the short haircut, the white passing face of Passage Rouge when we have business with the Shamokamanag. On the top floor of the Golden Eagle, though, inside the Migazi suite, presides the man I put up there just 2 years ago, Mac Beck, tribal president. While I take meetings with the state reps looking for outfield chatter for whatever Indian country bills they're moving through the legislature, or knuckle down with the governor's office to discuss the compacts regulating our gaming operations, Mac Beck is the name at the top of the ticket, the ursine face smiling from the billboards and campaign signs staked along the highway. He represented us in the intertribal delegation to D.C., where he grip and grinned with the president in the East Room of the White House, while I stayed in Passage Rouge for budget meetings, steering and development committees, and the granular minutiae that Mac Beck can't be bothered with. He's ceremonial in all sense of the word. He is the look, I'm the substance. Now, does that unequal workload make me bitter? Not in the least. I'm a pragmatist. I'm too much of an outsider, a suburban Indian, to pull enough Passage Rouge votes to get anywhere near the council. Mac doesn't have that problem. He looks the part and says the right words. Neither of us got here alone, and together We wield power not normally afforded to kids like us. But what good is that power if you can't keep it? That's the other part of my job. Over the last 3 months, I've handed over the bulk of my duties to the ancient order of aunties who run the tribal government so I can figure out how to get Mac elected to another 2-year term. In less than a week, the people of Passage Rouge will come down to the William R. Paulson Tribal Government Center on Peace Pipe Road to cast ballots for tribal president and council. Our election is too small for anything resembling scientific polling. But if you take the angry, misspelled all caps posts on Facebook and the picketers loitering outside the government center as indicators of how our campaign is going, you might come to the reasonable conclusion that the president's reelection prospects are in trouble. Or, in the words of our great orator in chief, straight up fucked. Is this the source of this morning's shiver? The very real prospect of defeat? Nobody thinks that's fun. And Fall Guy is in the unwritten job description of the operations director. I take the blame when everything goes wrong. His failure is my failure, and that's the way it's been from the jump. But as I get myself correct in the lobby of the Eagle and swipe at the permanent sleeplessness in my reddened eyes, I suspect that this November shiver is bigger than just next week's election. It's an existential shiver. After all the sacrifices I've made, people I've disappointed, laws we may have broken, and maybe a lost election, is this all there is? Just what did I trade in my meager decency for? I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Jon. Brilliant. All right. Our third author this evening will be Carrie R. Moore. Carrie's fiction and essays have appeared in One Story, the Sewanee Review, Virginia Quarterly Review, For Harriet, the Southern Review, and other publications. She has received scholarships and fellowships from the Community of Writers, the Sewanee Writers Conference, the Martha Heasley Cox Center for Steinbeck Studies. She earned her MFA in fiction at the Michener Center for Writers, where she won the Keene Prize for Literature and served as the fiction editor of Bat City Review. In 2023, she was the inaugural writer-in-residence at the Steinbeck Writers Retreat in Sag Harbor, New York. Take it away, Carrie.
Thank you so much, India. Thank you, Kevin and Ricardo, and everyone at Poets and Writers, and to my interviewer, Megan, whose work I love. I'm so honored to be here. I'm going to read from the third story in the collection, which is called All Skin is Clothing. The bullet shattered the window. Moonlight fell in shards as the air split cool above their beds. When he could look up, a tiny mouth gaped in the white paint above the headboard, a hole. Had the bullet missed him, his sister? Through the window's emptiness, he saw headlights swerving into the Kentucky night, one set, then two. Yellow light so harsh it scraped the house across the street, its peeling charcoal paint. Across the room, Cadence swooped out of her sheets, unharmed. A flash of dark limbs and a lone muscle of stomach. She pulled him against her, and he felt his 6 years crouching against her 15. Her shell-tipped braids covered his knees seconds before her arms belted him into her powder sweat smell. Her whole body hummed his name, Braden, even as his voice sunk deep into his chest. The door banged open, and Mama screamed, clutching her gown's pink folds. He thought the bullet had passed into his parents' room, lodging into her shoulder, a tiny wound blooming against her gown's embroidered lace, their shotgun house finally bowing to its namesake. But Mama rushed toward him, squeezed him so tight he knew the bullet hadn't touched her. Maybe she screamed because he was dead or dying. He couldn't find his voice. A pit had opened in his chest and swallowed him. He's fine, Mama. See? Cadence said. She held her hands up to the moonlight. They were clean of blood, shaking a little. He believed he was alive only because she did. Bray, baby, Mama said. She pulled him into the doorway, squeezing his legs and stomach and arms. Say something, please. He couldn't. Below him, Cadence hunched round as a stone. When he blinked again, she was standing, a silhouette in pale light, bits of glass glittering in her tank. She'd thrown herself across the floor for him. His sister, impossibly unafraid. No one outside, his father said, coming up behind Mama. He carried a knife, its silver tip quivering, a rhythm that traveled up the sleeve of his t-shirt. Walked around the whole house and there's not a soul. Everyone needs to calm down, Cadence said, pushing them out of the room. Everyone needs to breathe before they give themselves a heart attack. Everyone needs to let me change. They slept as a family after, their bedroom doors closed, sealing them in the hallway's tunnel. His father had called the police, but it was a busy night, and no one was hurt, and the bullet was probably a stray, and so an officer would come by in the morning, best they could do. A comforter wrapped his father to his mother. Another cocooned Cadence against him. His sister's breathing nudged his ear, a wash of solid air. He'd come so close to becoming the others. Boys who caught bullets in their spines, who got jumped, their split ribs puncturing their lungs, who went impossibly quiet after officers knelt on their necks. He searched for his own voice and found nothing. We're moving, Mama said in the darkness. I don't care if your mother did raise you in this house. His father leaned back against the wall. You'd have to stop homeschooling. You're really going to put them in public school? Go back to adjuncting? What else am I supposed to do? Spend all my time trying to better my children and they get shot at in our own house? What is that? I thought Bray. I know, his father said. You didn't see Cadence holding him. He was so quiet, I thought. Don't. Beside him, Cadence shifted. He curled into the shield of her. I'll sell the place, his father said. It's okay, I can let it go. Cadence breathed out as if she agreed, or as if what she heard took her breath away. They moved within 3 months. The old house sold for less than it was worth. The new one bought at a premium, rooms pedaling off its center. He circled through, watching his family. Mama and Cadence painting the kitchen butter yellow, Daddy cleaning the skylights in the master bedroom, dead leaves peeled from the glass. The three of them organizing the VHS collection, setting up the new computer in the den. No creaking floorboards here, no chipped door frames, exposed wood peeking through. Yet this house sat only 15 minutes from their old one. What was so different across a few painted lines and sidewalks, new zip codes? His own room felt so far from his sister's on the opposite side of the house. They'd painted his walls a blue that sometimes went black as deep water, night lowering the entire room down, down, dark before the sun pulled it to the surface again. Away from her, he didn't sleep much. But there were no bullets here, only his parents' worries rippling against him. He hasn't said anything in so long, Mama said over dinner. Spicy chili oozed over spaghetti noodles. His father sipped his tea before he answered, his sweet breath blanketing the table. Give the boy time, we just got settled. Across the table, Cadence gave him a smile that said, your voice will come back, nothing hurt you, Bray. They took turns holding him, passing him from lap to lap, though it was Cadence's he wanted. His sister's voice remained bright, ever present. Talks of school in the fall, peers she'd debate in classrooms, girls to swap secrets with. And please, could she visit people in their own houses for once, go out past 8 even, since this neighborhood was safer? Their father palmed his face, his beard buzzed low. I don't want you to think of things like that. Our old neighborhood, the people were still people, wanting different things. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Yes, you all are magnificent. I already knew that, but it doesn't hurt to be reminded of that in real time. So thank you. All right. We're going to follow that up with our fourth reader, Aaron John Curtis, who is an enrolled member of the St. Regis Mohawk tribe, which he'll tell you is the white name for the American side of Akwesasne. Aaron has judged for the Center for Fiction's first novel prize, the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance prizes, the 2019 Kirkus Prize for Nonfiction, and the 2021 National Book Award for Nonfiction. Since 2004, Aaron has been quartermaster at Books and Books, Miami's largest independent bookstore. He lives in Miami. The floor is yours, Aaron.
Thank you. This is a piece I thought I would be, or a portion, I guess, I thought I would be reading on tour, just because the book is called Old School Indian. And Indian is a big old falsehood. It's a misnomer. But I never ended up doing that one on the road, so I thought I would do it here. I guess all you need to know is that the protagonist's name is Abe. Abe is Mohawk Indian. You could argue Indian is a misnomer, and you'd be right. I could argue no one asked us when they decided we should be called Native American, and I'd be right. Somewhere in the 80s, non-res folks decided Indians was wrong at best and offensive at worst. So they let everyone, including us, know that we should be called Native Americans. Maybe call Abe that. You shouldn't call him Indian. Sorry, but you don't know Abe like that. It sounds weird coming from your lips, dismissive in some way. In fact, I'm not sorry. And don't call him Native American either. It's a bullshit PC phrase no matter who's using it. Just a way of saying you don't know any Native people. How about you call him Abraham Jacobs, since that's his name? Abraham Jacobs might not sound like an Indian name, but you've got the hardcore Catholic first name and the surname of what used to be the biggest landowners on Akwesasne. So if you're in the know, then you know, The name Abraham Jacobs is res as hell, cuz. Shit, you want to talk misnomers? Then let's talk Mohawk. In the 16th century, bridging a language gap didn't happen one-to-one. A translator somewhere spoke a common tongue with another translator somewhere else. So translator number one, let's call him Bert, translated the first language, let's say Kenyan into the shared language, usually French. Then translator number two, we'll say Ernie, translated the translation into the second shared language. So Bert did Kenyan into French, then Ernie did French into English. And that's if you were lucky. More often, you had to mix and match between 3 and 4 translators like a half-assed game of Rummikub. In the indigenous understanding of life, this is a wonderful opportunity to spend time getting to know one another. To the settler's mind, this is an incredible waste of time, which could be better spent gaining wealth and status. Is it any wonder settlers stopped talking and started shooting? Anyway, Mohawk. It's the garbled French version of an Algonquin word. Whether you're talking to the Narragansetts of Rhode Island who called us the Hoahogs, man-eaters, or the Lenape of the Unami, Delaware, who called us Wahuek, cannibal monsters, they're telling you we ate people. We called ourselves Ganyakeaka, people of the Flint. Flint might be brittle, but it's also 1,000 times sharper than surgical steel and never loses its edge. Being experts in that weaponry made us fierce indeed. We did most of the fighting for the Six Nations, so perhaps Mohawk is a metaphor. Or maybe Mohawks really did rip the beating hearts from their enemies' chests on the battlefield and eat them raw, like a book Abe pulled from the school library in 3rd grade claimed. Seems like a practical thing to do, ain't it? Particularly for a people so bad at war that, in the words of Benjamin Franklin, we might labor at it for 7 years and only take 7 lives. Stupid, primitive us not trying to obliterate everyone we meet. But doesn't man-eating cannibal monsters sound like sour grapes from a rival nation? The Algonquin and the Haudenosaunee hated each other, is what I'm saying. Although hate might be a strong term from a settler perspective. Rivalry is probably closer. If we killed someone during a skirmish over our shared borders, the accident brought the nations closer together through atonement ceremonies. Just ask Ben Franklin. If you go by maps and English, or if you ask a white dude, then Abe is a Mohawk Indian from the St. Regis tribe, part of the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy. Ask a traditional dude, she'll say Abe is Kenyakeaka from Akwesasne of the Haudenosaunee. If you're keeping score, that's people of the Flint, from where the partridge drums of the people who build. I've got just enough Kenyakeha to define the names for you, but not enough to string it into a sentence. For some reason, after all of that, I don't think we're establishing anything other than a lot of confusion around Native identity, which is the point. So we're cool. Now you can call Abe Indian, because we both know it's a shorthand for something neither of us has time to get into. You can call Abe Indian because you know it's not him. And then here's.
Thank you, Aaron. I love it. Thank you so much. All right. Our 5th and final reader this evening is Jemimah Wei, author of The Original Daughter, a Good Morning America book club pick, New York Times editor's pick, and Indie Next pick. It debuted at #1 on the Straits Times bestsellers list and has been named a best book of spring 2025 by Harper's Bazaar, Elle, Vogue, Time, Apple Books, and more. She is a 2025 National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree, a 2022 to 2024 Stegner Fellow at Stanford University, a 2020 Felipe P. de Alba Fellow at Columbia University, and a Francine Ringgold Award for New Writers honoree. She is currently a senior prose editor at the Massachusetts Review. Welcome, Jemimah.
Thank you so much, India. And thank you everyone for being here. Good morning from Singapore. It's so early where I'm at, but I'm so honored to be here amongst the rest of my cohort. This is my novel, The Original Daughter, and I'm just going to read from the opening chapter. So this is just right after the prologue, and this is part one. Part one, a beginning. 1996, Singapore. Erin didn't appear the way regular sisters did. She dropped into our lives, fully formed, at the age of 7. And she left like this too, suddenly, decisively. I was 8. One evening in May, right before dinner, my grandmother explained that her husband, who had been politically disappeared and presumed dead when my father was a child, had actually been thriving this entire time in Kedah, Malaysia, with his other family, right up till last week when he tripped and ripped his thigh open on a rusty nail. The wound blistered and bloomed, refusing to close up. It got infected. The fever burned through his body, shutting down his kidneys and liver, washing acid through his blood. Within 2 days, he was dead. He had left behind a son, a daughter-in-law, and a gaggle of grandchildren. But his secret family could no longer afford to raise them all, so we would be taking in the youngest, a girl around my age. After she said this, she looked at my face, switched from Hokkien, which, like most of my generation, I could understand but not speak, to Mandarin, which I could understand and speak, but not to her satisfaction. And in the manner of one making something absolutely clear, said, sepsis, blood poisoning. This is why you're not allowed to play in the longkang. I knew better than to talk back. There is a kind of person who considers himself superior for having endured calamity. And my grandmother never let you forget that she had lived through the war as a little girl. Instead, I dipped my head and peeked through my eyelashes at my mother, who had turned very slyly toward my father. Her eyes were creased attentively, but in her mind, a million shifting calculations flipped. She blinked once, then again, in quick succession. My father snapped out of shock. He's alive? My grandmother made an impatient sound. No. He backtracked. Right. How do you know this? Tiang, that's your pa's other son, wrote to me. Were you aware that he had another family? Obviously not. My grandmother drew a piece of folded yellow paper out of her pajama pants, which she wore everywhere, including to the wet market. It was full of angry Mandarin characters. My father held himself very still as he scanned the letter, clean-shaven skin drawn tight against his jawline. But I knew he was exerting himself greatly for the show of strength. His cheek blanched the way they always did when confronted with life's indignities. Rising gas prices, my grandmother's tyranny, the time he accidentally drank from the cup of chicken fat my mother was saving for rice. I watched the struggle play out on his face, imagine him crushing this new information into a small, compact pill and swallowing it, and watched his Adam's apple quiver and held my breath. It seemed to me that as long as he maintained his composure, whatever threatening reality my grandmother had conjured wouldn't spill out and scald our family. His eyes ran over the paper twice, thrice before his lips parted. Even so, my father said, still in that same fantastic, careful tone. He made his choice years ago. I don't see how this affects us. My grandmother put her hand out. He folded the letter in half, but didn't move to return it. In Hokkien, the shrinking dialect of her authority, she snapped, I've already agreed. Just like that? Only now did my father's voice peak. I glanced at him, alarmed. He had forgotten to close his mouth after the outburst, and his lower lip hung slightly open, revealing a pale white ring of gnawed skin. It was the first time I had seen the inside of my father's mouth, his defeat so total that to this day the increasingly lonely sound of someone speaking Hokkien is enough to render me pliant. Calmly, my grandmother extended her wrist and plucked the letter from between his fingers. What's past, she said, is past. Let's eat. I'll end there.
Thank you, Jemimah. Lovely. Doing like an air round of applause for all of you since I know we're not live, so we can't hear the applause. Wow, what a treat. Thank you all for such powerful readings. Now, as I have all the authors join me back on screen, we are going to head into the Q&A portion of today's event. And as a reminder for our viewers, if anyone has a question for one or all of our authors, please share it in the chat, and I will try my absolute best to incorporate as many of your questions as possible. I will go ahead and get us started. So here we are. Hi, hello to all of you. Identity and belonging, as tied to family, location, and community, seem to be some of the main themes in all of your debuts. I'm curious, how did these themes develop over the course of your writing process? We can also tie that into the general structures of your book as well. So basically, how did form and content grow and change as you were writing into your books? And how different is this iteration, the final one, from first draft that you started? And anyone can jump in at any point.
Bunch of introverted authors don't want to leap into the fray. Oh boy.
I think you just did.
Oh no. That's just me encouraging others to share.
I can start. I picked tribal politics as a subject precisely because it seemed to be the closest thing to dramatizing the idea of belonging, identity, belonging to a nation, a tribe. It seemed to really kind of coalesce around that. And what I think it allowed me to explore different ideas and different definitions of that belonging, whether you're on paper as a member of a tribe or a member of a community. Do you know the language? Do you know ceremony? Do you participate in that sort of thing? So I think that I chose that subject because I feel like I'm dealing with in my own life, like how do I fit in with my nation, a lac de flambeau, how do I fit with that community?
I think of my book as really about this question of belonging within a family and the degree to which your family of origin is inescapable. I have this line early on. The narrator's mother has died, and she says something like, it's like a variation of the tree falls in the woods dilemma. If you defined yourself in relation to your mother and your mother's died, do you exist, or something like that? And I guess I feel like I wrote this book as my own mother was dying and after I had just become a mother. And so it really exists in that sandwich generation intersection. And so I was really trying to explore this question of how we exist in relation to our mothers and our daughters. And I explore that in part through this question of an inherited genetic illness, which sort of literalizes that metaphorical question.
Well, I took 9 years to write this book. So I wrote the first words in 2014, and it's 2025 now because it takes another 2 years to publish after you sell the book. And so there wasn't one starting point for the book. Honestly, I had been writing, it feels like, a version of the story for a really long time. And I have had so many entry points into the story that it's really hard for me to pinpoint what one specific desire or action was. It only coalesced maybe about 7 years into the writing process, what I was really trying to do. And what that was really ask the question of what really can love endure, specifically within the context of non-romantic relationships. Because growing up, I felt pretty harassed by all the narratives of, romance being prioritized in a hierarchy of relationships in all the media and all the books that are fed to us. And that to me is not really true to the reality of growing up as a young woman anywhere in the world, not least Singapore, where most of your most intense, most codependent, and most intimate relationships are with non-romantic partners like family, friends, mentors, teachers, and in this case, two sisters, and one being adopted, so like an instant sister. And so it was really important to me to write the story of these girls growing up and really like flesh out their interior world. But another thing that I had been working with for a really long time was this idea of the returned sibling. So this idea of a child who had been given away and adopted. And that's because honestly, I'm a yapper. I love to talk. And since young, I would just be yapping to everybody I met. And there would be all these silences that I would run into because people didn't want to talk about something like that had happened in their family. And when you're a young yapper, you become really conscious of the silences in conversations. And I used to think that this is something that only happened in, like my parents' generation in my part of the world. But I'm coming right off the 12th week of my book tour now. I've been doing events for 12 weeks straight. And every single event, somebody comes up to me and says, hey, my mom was like that, or I had an aunt in my family, and this is her story too. And so this idea of family that's been chosen and chosen again and again, and given away and taken in, and what really makes a family, and what do our boundaries, and what does independence and intimacy mean in the context of trying to choose our chosen family and love, was something that ended up being a really strong through line for me as I finished this book.
Yeah, my story is similar actually because I spent about 10 years working on this story collection. So there were also multiple points of entry. And I think where it began for me is I'm from Georgia. I knew I wanted to write about the South. And I began this book while living in California, almost out of argument. I think because once I wasn't living in the South anymore, I could hear the like very casual and sometimes even unspoken ways that people had like one idea of what the South was. So then that was usually negative. So then I said, well, let me try to craft this story collection that reflects how diverse the South really is. And so what that allowed me to do was argue with myself or present multiple truths throughout an entire body of work, throughout several stories that didn't have to connect to each other explicitly. So like the mountains in Western North Carolina could be very different from beaches in Georgia, could be very different from beaches in Florida, could be very different from Louisville or Austin or Birmingham, and sort of having a book that moved through several places um, sort of allowed things to sort of change, both across an entire book, but also for me as a writer, as I was learning new facets of history.
As far as identity in old school Indian, Abe is struggling because he's been lived off the reservation for so long that he loses track of his identity, and the whole thing is just him trying to get it back. And in writing it, um, because America has an idea of what it means to be native, they have a way of portraying it and a way of talking about it and all this stuff. So anytime anything I'm writing reflects that even a little bit, I feel like I'm cosplaying indigenousness. So I wrote that fear into the book. And then that kind of freed me up just to write about, my family and my, alter ego, their identity, and not have to worry about what else was out there.
Lovely. Thank
Can I
you.
actually add something which just occurred to me because I didn't talk about process? It also took me about 10 years to write this book. And when I started writing the book, I typed it like most humans do when they write books. And then after I gave birth, I lost the ability to type for a while. And so I dictated this book almost entirely. So it actually it like didn't work as a written book. Like it didn't work between me and the computer. And then when I had to create this new writing process that was completely oral, and I had to sort of physically embody my characters and speak their words out loud, it really like leapt off the page and took off. And so I actually think that if I hadn't lost that ability to type, I wouldn't have written this book.
Thank you. Okay, here's a question from the audience. How close was the specific connection to your own life in early drafts of your books? And did your characters grow away from you and become more their own spirits as drafts progressed? Which I think is always a great question for fiction. So like how much of you is in your characters or your books?
I would say a lot for me. The early drafts, I was just trying to go away from reality as much as I could. And one of my coworkers was in my writers group, and she was like, "Why is this in Tampa and not Miami? Why is he selling insurance and not selling books? Why is he single and not married?" And I'm like, "Well, it's fiction. I can't do all that because that's real, you know." And she was like, "No, hit the gas, like go full tilt with it." So, like my own life provided the structure, and then as it took me about 10 years to write as well. Um, as I was going through it, and maybe 7 years in again, similar to Jemimah. It was about then it kind of took on a life of its own, where the bones that I had of my own life that I had laid all this over wasn't fitting where the narrative was going. So it was just like, but it made a good jumping off point.
I started with I, the experience of people that I recognized, people that had wanted to get involved with tribal government, people who wanted to make a difference, the idealism. I was trying to look outward as much as possible, so I wasn't writing a version of myself. But I think that in the course of drafting it, there are certain things about the narrator in Big Chief that I identify with, and particularly the quest for belonging, and finding that way back in, and reconnecting with that community. That part I definitely identify with, but there are other parts that I was definitely trying to. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not. Um, I've never wanted to try to take over the government of those sorts of things. They remain fictional. Like my narrators have different ambitions, but definitely the same need for belongingness.
I
Um,
feel, oh, go ahead.
you go.
Oh,
Okay.
you go.
Okay, I'll go. I find that I have trouble inventing people and places. And so I frequently take fictional characters, but I set them in these like scenes that are the scenes that I know intimately. So the characters are invented. They obviously have components of my family and me, but it is set in my family house growing up, in a house where we would go in Cape Cod, at my college, and I can sort of take these set pieces and then I can move characters around in those set pieces. Almost, I watch my 6-year-old play with little figures on the ground all the time. It's sort of like that, but I need the location to be familiar in order to do that. So that's one aspect. And then I was dealing with illness and sickness, and it freaked me out. So I took my symptoms and I gave them to a character. And it was like my way of like working through my fear and anxiety. She has a chronic terminal illness. I do not. But I definitely, I don't know why it made me feel better to take my symptoms and make them worse than my own, but somehow it did. It was a way that I could sort of work through the weirdness of my own body.
Yeah, I'm actually often working through the weirdness, I think, of my emotions. So I think there's something, as far as writing is like sense making, that I think is really helpful for writers. So most of my stories have very little in common with my life. There's not a lot of autobiographical overlap, but they do come from some emotional question that I'm wrestling with or some fear that I have. So for All Skin is Clothing, really what's at the center of that story emotionally is this sense I sometimes have of like, okay, what if the way that I'm hurting or the anxiety that I have is permissible? Like people understand why I'm going through that and they want to support me, but that doesn't mean they don't get tired and it doesn't mean they don't have their own issues. So with Braden, you have this 6-year-old boy, we care about children generally, as a cultural practice. You have someone who's been through a traumatic experience, and he has this relationship to his older sister where she looks out for him and she does feel protective of him, but she still gets really tired and she's still like, I want to be a regular teenager. And so that none of those things have ever happened to me personally, but that feeling, I think, comes from me.
I think I have something similar as well, which is like, with these two girls that I was writing, I was very keen on the idea of what is. So the narrator, who I don't necessarily think of as a protagonist, is this girl called Jen. And, she is trying to be like the best person for her sister, for her mother, but, in reality, is the worst possible person for them because being with the people that she loves and not having strong or clear sense of like independence or like a sense of self while growing up is, what makes her the worst possible person to be around the other people because they bring the worst of each other out in each other. So as for how much of the book came from personal experience, honestly, not a lot. Only insofar as I'm also Singaporean and female and a millennial. But beyond that, honestly, as I was working on it, it was just like, I think really way less restrictive to have the freedom to go and do whatever my imagination wanted. Whereas every single time I've tried to write something that came from a detail I saw in real life or based it off a model of somebody I knew, I've always hit a wall. I've always kind of felt like really handcuffed by reality. And so, interestingly, I think about 3 years or 4 years into writing this book, I had shown certain pages to somebody, and he was like, you should probably move this closer to your own life just because it would make it easier to sell. It was like, well, why are you writing this character? What's her job? I'll give her the same job as you. And I was like, I don't want to do that. People are going to think it's my life. And he was like, well, people are going to think it's your life anyway. So you might as well put in something a little interesting that nobody else can write from. And so actually that's why I gave the characters this angle later in the book of they're already trying to make their own way in a rapidly modernizing world, very quickly realizing that they're outgrowing the patterns and the roadmaps that their parents have managed to make work for them. And so they're trying to jump a class and they're thinking, how can I make money? How can I survive in a world that's like very capitalistic and very suffocating? And the internet is just coming up at the time. And so they give themselves, they audition for online TV channels, which is something that I did for a really long time. And I really put that in because a reader was like, you should do that. Nobody's writing about that. But, I took so long to write a book that now everybody has experience with that and is writing about that. So books take a long time. And that's just how it is.
I love it. Yes. And this is a good segue into another question from the audience, which goes more to like the business side of publishing, which is, can you all share your journeys to publication? So like, how did you actually get your book published is how I'm interpreting that question.
I'll just continue since I was already talking. But basically, I wrote this book on my own for, I want to say, from 2014 to 2018-ish. I was writing it totally on my own, didn't show anything to anyone, just like little bits here and there, which I was pretending were parts of a short story, which were actually part of this novel. And then I hit a wall where I was like, I can't seem to get better on my own. It was a craft level thing where I felt like I wasn't equal to my own ambition for the book. And so I was going around trying to, and in Singapore, there is no mature publishing industry, right? So I was applying for all these internships in publishing houses in the UK and the US without telling them that I didn't have a work visa. And so I would get pretty far, and then they were like, you can come here. And so finally, I reached out to a writer, and I was like, I keep running into this problem. And he was like, apply for your MFA, because if you just want time to write, that would be what it is. It will also give you the right to stay in the country. So I applied for my MFA at Columbia University, and at that point in time, just because our worlds are so different, I had no concept of there being such a thing as a fully funded MFA. I just thought to myself, of course you have to pay for being in school. And so I didn't even know that that was a thing you could do. And the only school that I had really heard of was Columbia. So I was like, I'll do that. So I applied to that, and then I got this massive scholarship from my government and from the university. And I went there, and because I was under so much economic pressure and visa pressure and time pressure, I was like, I better write this book or die. And then within like a couple of weeks, the pandemic hit, and then, we all know how that went. And so it took another, few years. And then during this time while trying to finish the book, I was publishing short stories pretty prolifically. And interestingly, when that happens, agents come knocking. They were like, oh, I've read this thing. Do you have a novel? And I would just keep lying. I'll be like, I have a novel. I'm done in like 2 months, which wasn't true. I was done in like another 3 years. But somewhere along the line, I then got offered the Stegner Fellowship, which was really such a blessing because firstly, it's paid time to just write nonstop for 2 years. And then it's also very prestigious. So then people then take note when you send out your book. So when I finally finished writing the book, I sent it out. I queried agents in the traditional way, basically just sending out cold queries and writing to people who had written to me over the 2 years where I was like lying and saying I'll be done in 2 months. And then from there, it was pretty straightforward where I just like interviewed agents, signed with an agent that I really liked. We edited the book together. We went on submission, spoke to a bunch of editors, and then started working with the editor that we ended up going with to polish the book for publication.
Well, I had kind of the opposite experience. I sent out short stories and got back a bunch of rejections, so I stopped sending out short stories, and I just kind of wrote everything I wrote, just ended up on my laptop. I just couldn't handle the rejection. Like I still can't. And I was at an author event at Books and Books, and I asked a question, and I guess it was articulate enough or revealed enough of myself that the woman who was eventually going to be my agent approached me afterwards and asked if I was a writer. And at that point, I've been writing for about 10 years. Um, so I said, sure. And I shared with her a bunch of stuff, and we took a lunch, and she was like, short stories are a little, they can be difficult. No one wants to publish them until one is a big hit. Then everyone wants to publish them. So she asked if I had anything long form I was working on, and I had I mentioned Old School Indian. That was probably a novella by that point, but she really liked the idea of it, and she just kind of encouraged me to go on with it. And once we had a finished draft, we shopped it around to the big six at the time, and maybe they were down to the big five. I'm not sure. Got back all rejections. And we took that feedback back. We reworked it, which we heard a lot of narrative drag in the middle, which just meant the middle was boring. So we reworked all of that, shopped it again, and yeah, we had a bunch of meetings lined up. And the Hillman grad, they were my first meeting. I just really liked the vibe that they had. Other meetings we had coming up were talking about things that they would want to change or see happen before they wanted to move forward with publication. Whereas Hillman grad, first thing they talked about was what they liked about it. So I went with them. Still not a short story published anywhere in sight. I was so hearing your intros, everybody's intros. I'm just like, man, I'm just an unknown quantity with a book. Like,
See, I fell in with the wrong crowd in undergrad. I think it's just the writing program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I just sort of hung around there. And I went to Cornell for grad school right afterwards. Was there and I taught there for a couple of years. Did the Stegner Fellowship, pretty close to that. But after all that schooling, you realize they kind of teach you how to write or how to get better at it, and but they don't really teach you what to write. So it took me a long time to figure out what that subject was, and it took me a few years. And like Jemimah, I worked on mine for a few years, maybe about 5 years, to get a full draft. Right now, I'm at the Sewanee Writers Conference as a fellow, and I went for the first time back in 2017, and that's when I met my agent, Michelle Brower. And we stayed in touch. I didn't sign with her until 2021 when I, actually had something to be shopped around. And we did a couple of really big revisions. We made it shorter. We restructured it. And by 2023, it was ready to go out. So we sent it out to a bunch of editors and got response right away.
Typically takes 2 to 3 hours. I only want to see the main.
Sorry?
You're good. I think
Okay.
we're good.
Yeah, so we sent it out to a bunch of editors, got good reads on it, pretty much right away, and then Simon and Schuster put in a preempt for it, and we went with them because they seemed to be the most enthusiastic, and they seemed to get what the book was about and what I was trying to do with it. So it was a quick overview of the last 25 years of my life. Other things happened in between, but
There's a little overlap with my story to publication. So I started going to writers' conferences in 2016, and I learned there that you could do agent meetings, and that if the meeting went well, that agent might give you their business card at the end of the meeting. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to go to as many of these conferences as possible because the idea of querying cold scares me. Yeah, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be rejected so coldly. And so I eventually met my agent at the Swanee Writers Conference. We stayed in touch for a number of
Hey.
years. And then eventually went out on submission with the story collection. We got rejections for about 6 months, with not a lot of tangible feedback. So I think when that happened, I kept thinking like, okay, how do what could it be? Like, what could I do better? And my agent was like, it's a good book. If the right person, you just have to trust the right person. Like sometimes you don't have to take into consideration everything that someone says. And it turned out that an editor who we had not sent the book to had read one of my stories in the New England Review, and then went to my website and saw the stories listed there and said, "Oh, Carrie has enough for a collection. Is she interested in putting one together?" And my agent responded, "Well, we're actually on submission right now with the collection. Do you want to see it?" We sent it to her. She loved it. She got what the book was about, made an offer. So I think maybe I'm traditionally published. I think there was one question in the chat that asked that question, but there, are some surprises along the way. I think everyone's path is different.
Yeah. So I have some components that are similar and some that are different. I had a whole other career. I thought writing fiction, I thought I wasn't that good at it, and it was a narcissistic self-indulgent, essentially. So like I didn't get an MFA. I was working at other jobs. And then, I gave birth, I couldn't type, I couldn't go back to work, and I started working on this novel. And then I had no idea what to do next because I hadn't gone to an MFA. I hadn't gone to a lot of writing conferences. So I posted a query in a Facebook group where people were giving feedback on queries. And there was an agent in the Facebook group who was like, "Hey, can I sign you?" And I was like, "Yeah, great, sign me." And so it was very lucky. But then we proceeded to get a lot of rejections for about 9 months. And the feedback was deeply contradictory. So it was really hard to know what to do with it. People like the first half, but not the second. People like the second half, but not the first. And there were a couple bites that were, I almost got signed. I almost did. It was really frustrating. And there were sort of a couple takeaways. It was too long. It needed an edit. And secondly, it's hard to sell a book about a mother who leaves her daughter. And it's hard to sell a book where 2 of the 3 main characters die. People were like, it's really hard to sell. There were a lot of, I love it, but I really don't know how to sell it. And so my sort of inability to understand the industry really didn't serve me. And I think, and I've heard this a lot, and I think to some degree it's true that frequently the big 5 don't have the timer. So sorry, that's my phone. I'm going to silence it. Frequently, the big 5 don't have the time or energy to do developmental edits. That's embarrassing. And so I needed a developmental edit. And so what happened was that I had submitted to the Design Fiction Contest and actually had sort of forgotten about it. And then 2 days after my mother died, they were like, "Hey, you won this contest." And that was great. And then because they were sort of a small boutique publishing company, I was able to get a lot of really good, I had a really great relationship with my editor, and we were able to do a really thorough developmental edit and create the product of the book that I really wanted. And yeah, so it was a circuitous pathway, but here we are. And I was able to get more input on things because it was such a small publishing company. So for example, this gorgeous cover right here, this beautiful tomato, I had a friend draw that and we used that as the cover. And I think if I had been with a larger publishing company, I wouldn't have been able to have that type of input or feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how different everyone's journeys are, but we're still coming to the same place. I think that's really important for everyone to keep track that there's like a million different ways to be a writer, to be an author. Okay. Keeping track of time myself, let's end on one final question because it seems to be something that the audience is really interested in dealing with, and it kind of like comes off of your response, Sarah. The editing process for you all. How did it work with you and your editors? Did they ever... I love the muting, unmuting tonight. This is great. Did they ever strongly disagree with you all on any points, or did they ever suggest something where you felt misunderstood? Or just in general, I'm going to just say, like, what was the editing process like? Did it feel easy to take someone else's feedback on like your baby in a way? How did that work for you all?
I was lucky that the editor really understood what I was trying to do, where I wanted to go with things. The feedback was always very open-ended. so that I could find the solution. It was never prescriptive. It was never like we need to do this or this needs to happen. But I did push back on prologues. I'm not a I didn't think a prologue was appropriate for mine, but so we butted heads for just a second there, but it was actually pretty. He was pretty understanding, and I think that I got what I needed out of the beginning without having to step out of the narrative frame.
I have only wonderful things to say about my editor. Her name is Chelsea Gibbons. This was the first book she ever edited,
Oh
and she
wow.
was phenomenal. And I think she was really great at pointing out places that didn't work, but wasn't prescriptive about how it had to change. So I learned to trust her instincts, and I never disagreed with her about the things that didn't work. She was always right. And the thing that would have been hard for me would have been if she'd said, "But do this," but she didn't. She let me figure it out, and then I would send it to her, and she would give me her feedback. And I was able to go back and forth with her a lot, so I didn't feel like I just had one shot, which was really important for me.
I think it was really similar for me. I also, whenever my editor, who I absolutely love, Lee Boudreau at Doubleday, whenever she gave me feedback, it was really just like asking asking questions about something, which would then lead me to like go look for the answer or, like look for the note behind the note. And it led me to think that actually a really good editor, it's also the really important thing is that they have to be a really, really, really good reader, like
Mm.
really good and really compassionate and really generous because I never felt like it was I was being told what to do. It really always felt like a collaborative process and just like absolutely enjoyable. Also because, honestly, all of us took about 10 years to write our books. For a long time, you are by yourself. It can be very lonely and very solitary. And then
Mhm.
suddenly you have someone who's like totally in your corner and so excited to make this work for you. And it just really feels, to me, I love being edited. It felt like a real blessing to be edited with such care and such generosity.
Yes.
I agree. I had a couple different writers groups, and I feel like they can only take you so far. At some point, you need someone who's looking with a critical eye, not just encouraging you to finish or to create, but who's kind of trying to direct you a little bit. And Aaron Wicks was my editor at Zando, Grad, and she would just once in a while, like I would do a scene I thought was great and really emotional, and I got to the heart of it. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm good, and I would move on. And then when she would just have go deeper. I think you need a little bit beyond the surface here, and I'd just be like, oh God, I didn't get away with
Mhm.
not ripping my heart out on this point, so I would have to rewrite it. I would be there pouring tears, and yeah, she was always right. She was always right, and we did a lot of trying to make each other laugh in our feedback, like trying to punch up metaphors, and there was a lot of discussion on cursing, what was too much or too many kind of things, and so a lot of weird, you know, just back and forth on that, given the minutia. But I really loved it. I think an editor who gets what you're doing is key.
It's one of the most amazing experiences ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was also lucky to have an amazing editor, but I'll say, that doesn't always happen, and that doesn't have to be in a professional experience where you're publishing a book. It could also be in a workshop or with beta readers or in a community. And in a writing community, and what I've learned is that if someone gives feedback that doesn't resonate with you, what can be really helpful is to maybe ask them a follow-up question about where that's coming from, because sometimes people are really good at identifying a symptom of something, but like wrong at what the problem is. So if someone says, "Oh, the pacing is really slow here," that's like them, making a statement about the book. But what they could also be saying is, "I don't understand this character's motivations," or maybe there's too many descriptions. So if you ask like some follow-up questions, it might help identify what's actually going on with the book, because sometimes what they are trying to match in their head with what's on the page is not quite aligning, but it's still trying to tell you something.
Mhm.
I love it. This has been such a fruitful conversation. And now it's time for my outro spiel. Okay, so it's been an absolute delight sharing space with all of you. I was going to say this evening, but I'm reminded that we're in different time zones this morning, afternoon, nighttime, wherever you're at. On behalf of Poets and Writers, I want to extend our gratitude to Sarah, Jon, Carrie, Aaron, and Jemimah for joining us over Zoom and for adding necessary and beautiful stories to the world with the publication of your debuts. We will drop once more in the group chat the link to our bookshop page, including all 5 titles, and the ability to easily purchase them, a link to the online feature, and a link to our membership page for those of you who would like to support our organization and become a member of Poets and Writers community. A special thank you to our lovely Zoom audience for spending time with us. And one final housekeeping note, tonight's event has been recorded, so a video of the readings and the Q&A will be available soon on our YouTube page as well as our website. So please be on the lookout for that and share it with whoever wasn't able to make it today. This concludes the celebration of our First Fiction 2025 authors. I'm wishing everyone a tremendous rest of your summer. Be well. We will see you next time. And thank you again to everyone for being with us. Bye,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Thanks so
So
much.
good to see
It's such a
everyone.
great honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.